The rivalry renews. Canada, USA at the Four Nations Championship. Joe DiBiase of Locked On Sabres stops by to tee up the game Saturday night, and we get into a little bit of Dylan Cozens trade chatter as well. That's all coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Locked On crossover edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast and the Locked On Leafs podcast. I am Joe DiBiase, Mike DiStefano, and David Morassutti all joining us here talking about the Four Nations tournament. We'll talk some Sabres and Leafs too. We'll talk some Dylan Cozens, maybe a little Mitch Marner along the way as well. Who knows what's going to come up? Gentlemen, how are we doing today? We having a good night?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We're like kind of putting our hands together, like warming ourselves up for some good old Canada versus USA. I can't wait, man.
I am so excited. It is going to be here in the States, at least Saturday prime time on ABC. I love that they're putting it right out in front on national TV. Very hyped for this game. We're going to compare the two teams, talk about the tournament as a whole. We'll get into some Sabres and Leafs stuff as well. I would be remiss though if I didn't allow you gentlemen the opportunity to take your shots, because I've got my Ryan Miller 2010 USA jersey here, and I know he owns a Crosby 2010 jersey.
I was looking so hard for that one for this podcast. I was looking for it just as a little subtle reminder of 2010.
Yep. Take your. I mean, was that not? I mean, there's Sochi, right? And then the World Cup of Hockey in 2016. We could start there, guys. I love these tournaments. I love best on best international hockey. I drove up to your neck of the woods. I drove to Toronto in 16 to watch those tournaments, to see a Team North America game. It, to me, is one of the biggest black marks on Gary Bettman's resume, that he has allowed a decade to go by without having a tournament like this.
No, I completely agree. And, I was talking about this today on my radio show here in TSN in Toronto, and we are talking about how, like, you watch back that initial game, that Canada-Sweden game, and just the pace that was involved in that game, the skill level, the speed. We haven't seen hockey like that since the Olympic Games back in 2014. I mean, you can look at the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, but to me, it's really, you got to go back 12 years, a decade to get all the way back to Sochi, 11 years, I guess, to go back to Sochi. The last time that we've seen hockey of that skill level. And, I'm excited to see what else we have for the tournament. I think that the big game that everyone's looking forward to is going to be tomorrow night between Canada and USA. Obviously, that's going to be a fantastic game from all parties, I think. But yeah, like 100%. And it's funny, like, I don't know, Joe, how you felt about the tournament leading into it. Mm-hmm. A couple weeks ago, I was a little lukewarm on it, not thinking it was going to be all that special, thinking it could be reminiscent, maybe one little step higher than the World Cup of Hockey from 2016. But boy, I was wrong after the first game. I mean, I think the intensity level is there. The give a bleep meter is extremely high for these teams and these players. I think we're in for a fantastic week of best on best hockey.
Absolutely. Like, I was very excited no matter what. I like, me, Mike, like, we did this a lot during the COVID year when we hosted Locked On NHL. Like, I love roster building and putting teams together. So I just enjoyed even the process of these guys and these GMs putting together their teams back in the fall. I guess I was pumped up for the tournament. I didn't know, though, what we were going to get. And I didn't know also how excited others would be. Like, I knew Canada would get up for it, but I didn't know what it would be like around here, how much respect the tournament would get. And you see from TNT here in the States puts out their ratings from it. It was their most watched hockey game of the year on their platform, and their most watched streamed game on their platform ever for hockey. So that means there was at least a curiosity factor. By the way, that was Canada and Sweden. That wasn't even Team USA involved in that game. So,
and I was listening, like Dan Patrick was talking about it. It was all over ESPN, right? Fox Sports, Colin Cowherd talking about the game, right? Like it's these major networks that you don't typically hear a lot of hockey talk out of, but when a game like that is played at that magnitude with the players that were in it, it garners the attention of the whole sporting world. And, we were talking about this on our show too, Dave and I, the other day, how it's, you got to give credit to Gary Bettman as much as you want to never give him as much credit as possible. The timing of the tournament is perfect. Like it's right after the Super Bowl is over. So the kind of Super Bowl hangover is done. The NBA trade deadline is gone. Like you've got the NBA All-Star game this weekend, but no one cares about All-Star games anymore. So that's not going to garner any attention. And it's right before, spring training really gets going. Pitchers and catchers have reported, but, no one's really paying that much attention to what's going on, down in the minor league complexes. So it's all eyes on the NHL and on the Four Nations tournament. And, through the first couple of games, I think we can all say that it's deserved getting the respect that it deserved. And it's because of the play on the ice.
Absolutely. Go ahead,
you
David.
brought it up. Like, what else is there really to talk about? Like the NHL really created a perfect storm for all this, and the fact that it's getting the hype. I know some people I was talking to, they're like, I don't know if I'm going to watch it. I'm like, I said to them, what else are you going to watch? Especially in Toronto. You're going to watch the Raptors lose by 30 points to Cleveland? Probably not. You're probably going to watch
Genesis, Dave.
We're not pumped up about Brandon Ingram over there. What are we? Nothing.
Well, when he actually gets onto the
we've got NLL lacrosse guys. We've got NLL. I'm just kidding. You can only go so hard on that, I think. Genesis too. But actually, the other sport you didn't mention, Mike, that I actually brought this up on my show this morning, that they got it in before March Madness. Yeah. Had they done this in March, at least down here, there wouldn't be a peep about it. No. So yeah, you're right. To their credit, they did a great job. And man, there's no comparison to the alternative, which you have most years, which is the All-Star game. And I don't know where you guys sit on All-Star games. Like I know they're at this point, I try to remember it's more about the kids at this point, right? Like the kids love it. They want to see their stars, because from my vantage point, it's completely useless. And this, even if you want to say it's not playoff, environment, playoff intensity, which again, I think that's harder to argue after the first couple of nights. Nobody in the world is going to tell you that this isn't 1,000 times better than an All-Star game.
100%.
I'm so happy that we don't have an All-Star game this year, and this is what we're getting instead. Like I guess sometimes get sick of the All-Star game just because it lacks the enthusiasm from the players. You could, like last year, Nikita Kucherov did not want to be at the All-Star game.
That's right. He was brutal. And
he got booed. The guy got booed because he just couldn't care less. And I think that's why the NHL is pushing for this. The NHLPA is pushing for this over doing the All-Star game. It makes so much more sense. Yeah. And I hope that, other markets will be able to get involved when it comes to hosting the tournament, so that the excitement can draw into these markets too.
I don't know, man. I gotta say, like, they should make sure that they got this thing at the Bell Center every year, because like the reception that the Montreal crowd gave Canada and gave that game the other night was something I don't think that they'd be able to replicate in many other buildings. Certainly not the one that we, look at all the time in Toronto. That place is a morgue, and they wouldn't have come anywhere close to giving that game the respect it deserves. As what do you mean?
Dude,
what are you talking about?
I've been to game. I went to the World Cup. Joe, you were in Toronto for the World Cup hockey.
Yep,
that's where the real fans show up, not the.
Listen, I thought it was the game that I went to. We were there for one day. We went to, it was an afternoon game. I think that was Czechia or Czech. It would have been Czech Republic at the time, and Team Europe. Remember the team that looked like they were wearing like a toothpaste uniform, and Ralph Kruger was the coach, right? And it was like the other European countries. That afternoon game kind of dead, but it was an afternoon weekday game. That night, I think it might have been a Friday night, we went to Team North America against Russia, and that atmosphere was awesome. I mean, the game was great. It was super fast paced. I don't think that game physically was anything close to what we've seen the first couple of nights of the Four Nations here. But I remember Toronto doing really well for that game, at least. I don't know. I've never been to the Bell Center though. So
the Bell Center is electric. I won't dispel that. Like the Bell Center is just something else.
I'm just saying, that the suits would have got a hold of those tickets, and it would have been kind of quiet in that building if it was in Toronto. That would have been the case. So But regardless, it's not. It's in Montreal, and it looks like a couple of years from now they'll be doing the 2028 World Cup of hockey. So we'll see where it ends up doing that. But it seems like there's an appetite to keep best on best hockey on the NHL calendar at least every couple of years. Which, hell, based on what we saw the other night, it should definitely be remaining that way.
Absolutely. Maybe when they pull off one of those tournaments, we could do a Toronto-Buffalo combo right across the border like we're doing Montreal and Boston right now. We'll see. That'll be after the Olympics, of course, in a few years. We'll take a timeout here. When we come back, we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of the top two rosters, the two favorites in this tournament, U.S. and Canada. We're finally going to get to see these two teams on the ice against each other in a best-on-best game. Even that World Cup of hockey, you have to remember, they lost some of their players to Team North America, so even that wasn't fully best-on-best. Both of those teams, I'm sure, would have had, your McDavids, your Matthews playing for them. So we'll get into it when we return here on the Locked On Sabres and Locked On Leafs podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game faces off, the NHL action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on the third period comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. When I'm backing my team for that late-game rally or picking a player to score a goal, I never feel like I'm missing my chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network.
Welcome back. Stinky Joe DiBiase, David Morassutti, David and Mike DiStefano, all of Locked On Podcast Network, me of the Sabres, and Dave and Mike from Locked On Leafs. And we got a 2-week break here for our teams, but we're glad to have the break because we've got an awesome tournament here. And Saturday night, USA and Canada. I've been kind of pushing this narrative for a couple of years, guys, and I don't know that I've fully ever gone to. I think the U.S. is more talented than Canada. I just think the talent gap is absolutely smaller than it ever has been. In a short tournament like this, I don't know how much this point holds up, but I've always thought the U.S. has a great chance of finally topping Canada because of the difference in goal. Again, short tournament, though, that's a lot harder to predict. You could get one or two great games from almost anybody, and you still have starting caliber goaltenders for Canada. So let me kick it off with you guys. Like, to you, how does that sound that this is the smallest the gap has ever been between these two countries in this sport?
Oh, Mike's riding on the Team USA train quite a bit. If you listen to Locked On Leafs.
All right.
It's a little
Sadly, Joe, I'm aligning myself with you and your fellow Americans. And it's for the same reason, though. Like you brought it up, the disparity in goal. Like Connor Hellebuck, the way this guy's playing, like no one can touch him. And he can steal a game. I mean, we're talking 4-game tournaments here. So if he gets hot for a week and he goes out there and he doesn't allow you to get pucks past him, which he has not allowed anyone to do at the NHL level, you put out the best blue line in the tournament in front of him, even without Quinn Hughes. I still think that it's going to be hard to score on the Americans, and they've got the best goal scorer in the world up front in Austin Matthews. So it's a really, really talented team, and I agree with you. I think the talent gap has definitely shrunk between USA and Canada. I think the U.S. National Development Team program has done a great job. I think you look at the product that the NCAA has been able to pump out over the last few years. Macklin Celebrini and what he's been able to do in San Jose is a great example of what the NCAA products, Canadian, will one day represent Canada, but did come from the American ranks in the collegiate level, alongside guys like, Jack Eichel and Jack Hughes and all these other guys who are suiting up for the Americans. But I think it's going to be a great game. Don't get me wrong. I think you can almost like flip a coin. But when I'm looking at the rosters and ultimately a short tournament like this where one bad goal, one bad break can sink you. I just have more faith in Connor Hellebuyck making that big stop than I do Jordan Binnington or Aiden Hill.
Dave, where are you at comparing these two teams?
I think it's close. I mean, you even saw how close it was between Canada and Sweden in the opener, right? I think that what obviously sets the USA apart is you could take any of those goaltenders and just say, like, try and beat them, right? Yeah. Like, Canada could only hope to have one of those guys as an option for them. But I mean, as we saw yesterday, like, just the depth of talent that Canada has up front. Well, I think they match up so well with the U.S. With that, I'm very curious of how the blue lines still match up, because I think there's good talent on the U.S. blue line, and especially with Canada. Now with Canada down Shea Theodore too, like that's a blow to that blue line. So I'm curious to see how much really there is the gap. I still think with Canada, they've got, when you have McDavid, when you have Crosby, when you have McKinnon, that gives you kind of that extra cachet. Yes, there's Austin Matthews. There's Jack Eichel. There's so much good talent in the U.S. But I just think Canada's just got that little bit of the edge with the uprush, like the higher end NHL players there.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that either. Like, I think the three best players in this matchup, maybe the two best players, although again, Matthews is in that tier, and that's kind of the point I want to get to, is that, like, I look at past tournaments.
Locked on Leafs, Joe. We'll give you.
Is he third? Is he second? 3. I mean, in my mind, the way I think of the sport in the league wide is McDavid is clear cut number one, and I don't want to listen to anybody being next to him. And then McKinnon and Matthews are like the same category for me.
I put Draisaitl in that category. And
Draisaitl, okay, I think
a 2, 3, 4 is you could put them in any order.
Fair enough. I would agree with that. The looking at past U.S. teams. The area, in my opinion, they've always fallen the shortest is they've had goaltending. They've had good defensemen. They've even had great wingers, Patrick Kane and Zach Parise, others. They've never had the elite level centers that can compete with. Canada's always going to have the top guys. But if you look at that 2010 tournament, who the U.S. lined up against them in the gold medal game down the middle was David Backes, Paul Stastny, Joe Pavelski, and Ryan Kessler. None of those were bad players. They're all pretty good players, right? 30 goal scorers, two-way guys, gritty, but none of those guys were ever like what we're talking about. Like, conversation is one of the best centers in hockey. And I think you definitely have that with Matthews. I think you even have that with Eichel and Jack Hughes right after that. I know Hughes isn't playing center right now. We'll see if that changes at any point. They want him in the top 6. But that's another area to me that the gap has shrunk, is that the center gap used to be as wide as humanly possible. And now it's still advantage Canada, but I think it's a lot closer.
Well, look at that list of names you just mentioned from that 2010 roster. Right? Yeah. Like, where would Dylan Larkin fit among those list of names?
I mean, maybe second.
Maybe second, possibly top line center on those teams. And he doesn't make the list here of your top 4 centers. He's shoved over to the wing. So I think you're right. I think the U.S. is doing a great job in developing talent at this point. I think it's a credit, like I was saying earlier, to the development system of the national program and the NCAA. And, just the fact that the sport looks to be growing in different pockets of the country. Like Austin Matthews, kid's from Arizona, kid comes from the desert, and he was able to kind of come up and turn into a superstar. So I think there's a lot of factors for it, but certainly you look at the American roster right up and down from first line to fourth line, from first pair to third pair, and obviously the guys they got in goal. This is a good team. On paper, I was on record on Locked On Leafs saying I think the Americans have the best team on paper, but you play the game for a reason. And I thought Canada had the clear-cut better team on paper against Sweden in night 1. Sweden took them to overtime. Sweden took them to overtime. And I'll be curious in this game specifically how it goes down, because these two teams play different styles. I think they're built differently, right? You look at Canada, that team was built on skill and speed, right? Speed and skill. I think the Americans are a little bit more of a heavier team. You know, you got some guys who could bang. You've got the Kachucks. You've got JT Miller. You've got Matt Boldy, Brock Nelson. Like, it's more heavier guys who are going to play a little bit more of a physical game. How is that going to match up? You got speed and skill versus physicality. I think those two, the clash we're going to see tomorrow night, I'll be curious to see what shines through.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see how much the Kachuk brothers are able to drag this game down into the mud also. Like,
that's what they have to do. It's what they got to do. But I'll tell you one thing, what wins in the playoffs? That style of hockey. And
that's right.
That's kind of why I look at the U.S. group and think they got a good shot. Because if that wins in the playoffs, who's to say it's not going to be able to win here at the World or at the Four Nations?
The one thing, for me, I don't know, but like I would slight pick U.S. to win this tournament right now. That is what the betting lines say. Like, again, they are the slightest. It's basically a pick 'em. It almost depends where you look. FanDuel Sportsbook, our partners have them as a slight favorite. But I think the other thing that I'm very curious about, last thing I'll say about Saturday's matchup, is how many penalties are we going to call? Because it didn't really happen a lot on night one. You saw what it could look like in the first minute. And it's
a great 10 seconds, didn't we, boys? What a 10 seconds it was.
It only took 10 seconds. It was amazing. It's like, man, like right off the gates, like this was incredible. McDavid to Crosby to McKinnon. It was just beautiful. And that's when I thought they'd run away. They looked like the Monstars early against, Looney Tunes at the beginning of that game. How many penalties are we going to call? Because I'm not saying the U.S. doesn't have an elite power play unit as well with Eichel and Matthews staged on each side. But if we're going to be calling 3-4 penalties on each side in that matchup, and I've got a penalty kill against that Canadian unit, that's when I would think, okay, I would switch my pick.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
We'll see. I don't know what they're going to call.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Like, we usually are not ones to talk about the refs too much, but I do think that when you have it, especially the intensity that I think this game's going to have, and the built up, or it's already, we're talking about it, the built up, the hype towards it, players are going to bring it a bit more, and I think it's going to add to that intensity. And I'm sure the officials don't want to be the show of it, but
true,
hasn't stopped them before.
Yeah. Do you guys got a pick? You want to make a pick before we get some other stuff, or do you want to save it still?
You know what? I think Canada wins this one. I do. I think they win this one. They'll have that extra day of rest, right? They got that extra day of rest.
There's a butt coming here, folks. I can tell you that. I can sense it.
But that doesn't mean I think Canada can win the whole thing. I think we could see a situation here where Canada wins this game. They end up in first place in, the round robin, we'll call it. And then, the Americans will have a good shot to maybe upset them in the final. But Canada's going to have home ice advantage ultimately, too, in that one. I believe they actually are the home team in that game. So they'll have final change. Plus, it's being played in the Bell Center. Like, we saw how loud it was against Sweden. The Americans come to town. Oh boy, it's going to be loud in there. And the Boo Birds, every time anyone in a blue shirt touches that puck, it's going to be real, real loud. So I'm excited for the game. I think Canada can edge this one out Saturday night, but a rematch, it's tough to beat a team twice when two teams are this stacked.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going a bit of the opposite. I think we see a bit of the 2010 where Canada maybe doesn't get the goaltending performance. We don't even know who's starting in the game for Canada, right?
Is there Luongo in the ranks? Who's the Luongo who's going to take over?
Say, maybe they go with like a Jordan Binnington's the Brodeur here, and then Aiden Hill becomes the Luongo,
or Sam Montembeault.
Huh? Yeah, listen, Binnington's not making it 60 minutes with the Kachucks on the ice. Someone's getting tossed. We know that's happening.
I want to see that for sure.
I don't know who's getting tossed, but somebody's getting ejected if those three.
I saw a great tweet yesterday I think it was after the second period, said someone throw a water bottle at Binnington.
Yeah,
and I'm hoping the Kachucks or someone throws a water bottle at Binnington pregame, and he just goes Super Saiyan mode. I hope Binnington gets a start. I don't know your thoughts on it, Joe or Dave. We kind of talked about it on Locked On Leafs the other day, but I'm curious to get Joe's opinion on it because you watched the game Canada-US, and Binnington wasn't very good through regulation through the first, we'll say, 55 minutes of it. You're thinking to yourself, well, all right, they gave it a go. They're probably going to go back to Aiden Hill for game 2 against the Americans. And then he put on the performance he did in overtime. I personally believe that he earned another start Saturday night against the USA. What do you think the Canadians should do in goal there?
If I were them, I would lean going Aiden Hill. I would want to see what that looks like before I get past the round robin. Binnington, I agree. He was, I mean, the couple saves he made in overtime were spectacular. He did kind of give up would you call it a soft one to Kempe in the third?
Two softies. He gave two softies in that game. I say he didn't play good. Like the first 55 minutes, there's no question. Yeah.
And when the margin for error against the U.S. is that slim, I'm not saying Hill couldn't give up one of those either, but I just would be a little spooked by Binnington giving up two of those in the first game.
I just wonder if he found something in overtime. Like he finally got to that gear. He channeled.
He's known to get hot. He's known to get hot.
And if he like run with it, and see if he can keep it going. If not, then and you can go to Aiden Hill for that game against Finland. And see where it goes from there. But I personally think I'd go back to Binnington here.
Well, we'll see what they do. When we come back, we'll transition a little bit. We got some trade rumors that have been floating around our two teams. You don't get a lot of trades between the Sabres and the Leafs, but maybe there's one on the way. We got less than a month until the trade deadline. Does Dylan Cozens to Toronto make any sense? We'll chat about it when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres and Locked On Leafs podcast.
New sponsor alert. This show is sponsored by Farm to Fork. If you're a fan of premium, locally farmed meats delivered straight to your door, I've got some exciting news. Farm to Fork makes it easy to get high-quality steaks, air-chilled chicken, wild-caught seafood, and more, all with no antibiotics, hormones, or GMOs. Plus, everything comes flash frozen and individually packaged for your convenience. Farm to Fork's meats are top-notch. I've had some amazing steaks that were tender, juicy, and perfectly cooked. The chicken is air-chilled, so it's fresher and more flavorful than the ones that you'll get in the store. They're delivering all across Ontario and Western Quebec, and the best part, delivery is free with a minimum order of $199. You don't even have to leave the house to get this quality. I've got a special code just for you. Use LOCKEDON40. You'll get $40 off your first order at Farm to Fork. So visit farmtoforkdelivery.ca to start stocking up on the best meats around. Again, that's LOCKEDON40 for $40 off your first order. Farm to Fork. Delicious, locally farmed meats delivered straight to your door.
Welcome back. We're talking some trade stuff now. We talked some Four Nations. Very excited about that. But of course, we've got our own teams that we're covering. The Sabres and the Leafs are off for a couple of weeks, and we are under a month away from the NHL trade deadline. But guys, we've had some rumors that have connected our two teams, and it involves Dylan Cozens, who's been the subject of a lot of trade reports this year, and Toronto being mentioned as a potential trade destination. I know you guys have chatted about it. For our listeners, kind of a reset on like where you kind of see him as a fit for Toronto. I mean, he has not had a great season. Last year was not great either, but we have seen a much higher level of play from him in the past. Just kind of feels like a player that's lost at sea right now and really could use a change of scenery.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, he's definitely a player that I'm sure he's heard the noise. I'm sure it's not helping that the Sabres haven't exactly been pulling their weight in terms of, this team with this great, nucleus of youth that hasn't really taken that step forward. And I'm sure that maybe there's a bit of pressure on him to do it. So I think there's probably a lot going on that has impacted his ability. Like, I was a big Dylan Cozens fan when he was drafted by the Sabres. I thought, the guy's got size. The guy, there's a lot of good tools that he brings. It's just the consistency hasn't really been there. So it's very unfortunate. I think, I mean, if the Leafs were ever to look into it, I wouldn't say no, but I mean, the price is what concerns me, and it's the contract too. How do you get it all to fit what the Leafs need to do going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at, 5 more years left on this deal at $7.1 million. And you look at the season that he's had this year, 11 goals, 16 assists, just 27 points. That's coming off, last year, which was a struggle also, just 18 goals, 47 points in what was the first year of that deal. that's where you do get a little, wary about this contract and about this. It's like, okay, is he going to get back to being the player that we all thought he was going to be, after that breakout season where he had 31 goals, 68 points back in 22-23? If he can get back to that, then I think obviously he'd be a terrific addition for the Maple Leafs, especially with an aging John Tavares. He just kind of seems like a perfect fit to slide in there as the number 2 center of the future for this Maple Leafs team. But if he can't, that's a tough contract to bring in. And I'd imagine that Buffalo still believes in this player. And there's a lot of teams that believe that this player can get back to or close to being that 70-point, 30-goal scorer. He's still very young. And for that reason, I feel like it's going to be an expensive move to make. Like, what are you hearing, or what do you believe the acquisition cost would be to swing a Dylan Cozens deal right now?
Well, what's really tough about it is, and this is kind of where I have a hard time finding a trade that makes sense anywhere, not just Toronto, is the acquisition cost is something that helps your team right now. I mean, the Sabres are not interested in picks and prospects. They've been doing that song and dance for 7-8 years. They're looking for something that could help them take the next step. I think there's a reason why, Friedman was on this and LeBron and all the big insiders, and we heard the same thing, that they badly want Elias Pettersson. And it sounds like he's off the trade market now, at least probably. I guess it could go south again in Vancouver, and the way Rutherford's talked about him, maybe that he could get back on the market as quickly as he went off. But I think they wanted to make like a Cozens, Bo Byram for Elias Pettersson trade. I think they wanted something where you take Cozens, you put something else really valuable with him, and you go upgrade. But the fact that he's the center piece of all these trade rumors doesn't make it sound like, you're getting something better. Like Detroit is in the rumors. You're not getting Lucas Raymond for Dylan Cozens and something else, or else we'd all be talking about how Lucas Raymond's on the trade market, not Dylan Cozens. So that's where it's tough. I think you want a center back, because the Sabres, if they were to trade Dylan Cozens, Tage Thompson's been moved to the wing for the last month. And I'm not saying he couldn't go back to center. He played great at center earlier in the year. Lindy Ruff has just liked what he's looked like at the wing. He scored a bunch of goals. He's on almost a 50-goal pace. But you've got Yuri Kulik, a 20-year-old rookie right now that's playing in the top 6 at center. You've got Ryan McLeod, who's fine, but he's definitely nothing more than a third-line guy. And then you've got your fourth-line guys. You trade Dylan Cozens away, you have one top 6 center, and it's a rookie who, you don't know. He's looked good for 20 games, but I don't know what he's going to look like in 2 years. We thought Dylan Cozens would look great in 3 years, and that hasn't come to fruition. So you need a center back. And then, again, if you don't want picks and prospects, what else are you getting on top of it? I just don't think there is a lot that makes sense. So I think they do believe in him. I think they might feel like they're out of answers, though. I don't know that they know how to get him back on track. He is a player that when he scored 31 goals and had 68 points, the Sabres played as wide open a style as humanly possible. Don Granato told their team, which was the youngest team in hockey, go make mistakes. Play free, play open, play fast, play to score. Don't overthink things. Play on instinct and play as fast as possible. And as Dave mentioned, Cozens is a guy with traits. He's got size, and he is super fast. In my opinion, he's not really a guy that thinks the game very quickly. I think he plays better. Maybe you would even say this would fit his style in Toronto. He plays better when he's playing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And what have the Sabres done the last 2 seasons? They said, oh, no, we can't win playing wide open hockey like that, making all these mistakes. We got to slow it down. We got to play better on our own end. We got to think the game better. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Dylan Cozens has struggled since they've made that switch. So you tell me about Toronto and their style for that, and other teams too. But my concern would be you're only going to get results out of him if you're willing to let him play loose and free.
Which is interesting, right, Dave? Because, a year ago you would say, yeah, that might work in a Sheldon Keefe system. Craig Berube is a more old school, straight line kind of hockey, where he doesn't want you making all those fancy dancy plays and, making the one extra pass and darting up and down the ice. He wants you just to let's go to the net. Let's make sure we get the puck down low. We're going to cycle. We're going to get it into the center of the ice, and let's just get pucks on goal. And, it'd be really interesting to see if there's a fit there. I just, as you mentioned, if Buffalo's looking for, a hockey trade, there's really not much that Toronto has.
Who would the two players be even? Like I've looked at their roster and I'm like,
you guys don't want
like is Bobby McMahon a guy? Like I don't know who the name is. Like I don't know that there is a trade that makes sense. Nick Robertson I know is wanted to trade, right?
I don't think there's a center on this Leafs roster like that is available that the Sabres the Sabres say, yeah, we'll do that.
Right. Their centers are too good for this. Honestly.
Well, not only that, it's just like you got Matthews,
obviously.
Right? Tavares. Obviously. And then it's like after that, it's nothing that.
You want Max Domi? You can take Max Domi off our hands.
I don't. What's that? Isn't that 3 years of almost $4 million or something?
385 or 375 for another
Mike's trying to offer up Max Domi to any team right now.
I'm not gonna lie. I might be a little scared the Sabres like Max Domi. I'm not. I think what they want guys that are like that. Like. Personality wise, I'm not saying he's 3 goals on the year. I know it hasn't gone great, but they're looking for that edge, and that's the one other thing I'll say for your listeners on Cozens, because there's so many pieces to him that's like so tough to figure out. You remember the Heritage Classic a couple years ago when Matthews cross checks Dahlin up high and they were getting into it, and then Cozens runs Matthews, and then he gets into a fight with, was it Hyman? I don't remember who he fought. And he gets kicked out. Like, Cozens was like that. Cozens was not afraid of anybody. And then he fought Garrett Hathaway of the Philadelphia Flyers at the beginning of last year. And he got his face caved in. And he missed time with a concussion. And I've been very hesitant to just declare that that's why he doesn't look the same now. But I'll tell you the most popular answer from a Sabre fan, the casual Sabre fan right now, as to why he has lost his mojo is that he got destroyed in a fight and he played fearless before that. And that would scare me a little bit if that's true. And I'm not saying it is, and I'm still very skeptical that it is, but just know that's out there. That he's not fearless anymore because he got his face caved in.
Yeah. What do you think? Like, what would the ask be for Toronto? Like, is it if it's Matthew Nyes? I think it's a no. I think
if I'm being honest, I think maybe he gets laughed off the phone. You tell me. Knowing Kevin Adams and what he was looking for with Pettersson, I think if he calls Toronto or Toronto calls him, he's asking how he gets Mitch Marner.
Yeah, that's not happening.
And he's probably getting told no, right?
Mitch probably saying no.
That's the other thing. Like that's why, like I don't see it, because the one thing I think Adams would really want is that, and I think both the player and the team are maybe laughing. Like, Mitch Marner's not coming to the Buffalo Sabres. Like, no. I know Sabre fans love
no
to point
move
out
there too, right? Like, no trade, no move, and like Mitch Marner is not going to leave Toronto to go to Buffalo.
I don't care how big a Bills fan he is, as much as that gets brought up, right? Like, he loves Josh Allen. There's no amount he could love Josh Allen, in my opinion, that would have him come to this hockey team.
Does that get brought up a lot in the city of Buffalo?
Yeah,
because Marner's a Bills fan. He might come to Toronto next year.
Like, you got no idea. We're starving. We are. Do you know how hard it is to try to find any reason why someone would want to come here? I mean, you literally, I'm not kidding, because we had this player survey.
Why am I reading reports that the Sabres are looking to move out Alex Tuck? He's a local guy.
They're not looking to that.
I think guy around.
I think they're getting calls on him. I don't think they're looking to move him. I don't think they can move him because, again, they have such a hard time getting players to come here. The guy that grew up a Sabre fan is not somebody you could give up on, because there are not many guys that grew up Sabre fans that are as good as Alex Tuck.
That would be an interesting piece, however. If we want to get crazy, actually. If you wanted to get crazy, and if he called, he made the phone call, and he said, Tree, what would it take to get Marner? I mean, Cozens in the deal, Alex Tuck in the deal.
Well,
and like, are you willing to throw in?
Just like, are
you willing to throw in another one of those young blue liners to make that work? Like we're talking almost like a Rantanen-esque trade here. Like, we're looking at that as the blueprint. Now, I don't think Cozens is anywhere near the player that Martin Necas is. Not even close to it. No. So you'd have to add a lot more to that deal. So, do you could you possibly get an Owen Power out of that trade as well?
It was just the name I was going to say.
Right? Yep. Like Owen Power, Dylan Cozens, Alex Tuck for Marner, and like whatever else it takes to like go get Max Domi as well, kind of match salaries and whatnot. Like if we want to get crazy here, that's the type of package it might take to pry Marner out of Toronto. I 100% don't ever see that happening. Same. But that's the type of like NHL GM mode type of maneuver it would take, I think, to make that happen.
I don't think the conversation starts without Owen Power's name being mentioned. And even then, I don't know. Like Power has been very good this year. He's still looking for his man strength, though, which I think will come. Like some guys, it takes a few years. He's still only 21, 22. But he's been very good offensively. You really do. Like, I know we go long a lot, me and Mike, but you have no idea what it's like to try to figure out. Everyone's no movement clause has the Sabres on it. I'm willing to assume that. Every player in the league. So really the exercise is, are they from here? Do they know anybody on the team? Have they have any experience with the head coach? Do they work out with guys in the summer? And I'm not kidding. We do get to like maybe the fifth thing on that list is, do they like the Buffalo Bills? You are searching for anything because the organization, the franchise, I'm from here. I know the reality. Why would anybody want to play for the Buffalo Sabres? If you want to win in the league, you got to see it first.
Mike knows this year I've had a lot of, I feel like obviously Sabres being a Leafs rival, never really had sympathy for them. This year I truly have sympathy for that fan base.
They're nowhere. I mean, I don't know what you do next. It's very tough. Like, I don't know what you do next. Is it even a rivalry? I mean, it is for this side just because Leaf fans take the building over every time they play, and that can get annoying, but
they take the building over. I think the only reason why like you would consider it a rivalry, it's not necessarily that. It's just like I think Toronto more so is like, why do we always lose to Buffalo? Like that's more so the conversation, not like, oh, it's the battle of the QEW, Buffalo, Toronto, buckle up. It's, are they going to lose again? Like, I don't understand why they keep losing to this team that can't make the playoffs and haven't in the last 12 years yet somehow have a sub 500 record against them.
I will see if I can pull this up for you very quickly, but I looked this up earlier in the year, and I'm pretty sure the Sabres, during their 14-year playoff drought, their highest win percentage against any opponent is the Maple Leafs.
There you go.
Who have been great for half of the drought at least.
Yeah.
And even when, Kessel and Phaneuf were there, they weren't amazing, but they were better than the Sabres were those years. Yeah. So, yeah, they get fired up for it. It's, I sound like I hate the Sabres here.
Can I ask you
it's one of the only nights of the year that the arena's full.
True. Very true. I ask you one question. One question only before we get out of here.
Yeah, then we'll wrap up here. We go long.
Yeah, as the host of Locked On Sabres, like, is it painful when you see Jack Eichel go on to win a Stanley Cup, Sam Reinhart go on to win a Stanley Cup, Ryan O'Reilly go on and win a Stanley Cup? The list kind of goes on and on. And
you just want to bury Joe in misery, man.
I'm just saying it. You look at your team and you're like, this team, it needs a number one center. Oh, Jack Eichel.
Do I look like I haven't been doing this for
Sammy
3
Reinhart
years?
Could be a number one center. It's like, you had him.
Yeah.
Let him go. Every one of them.
Dave, he's not bringing up anything new. I've been doing round and round on this for a while. This is, I am cold-hearted inside on that right now. I think it definitely hurts fans. Like it depends what kind of fan you are. If you love those players, or even if you hate those players now, maybe it drives you crazy. If you are someone that believes the organization is the problem, then you could take it as, see, you guys don't know what you're doing, because you blamed these guys as the problems, the guys at the top of your lineup, and said you can't win with them, when the rest of the team and the coaching was all a disaster, and then they all immediately left and all won cups. It's very much of a twist of the knife, I think, for the team. I think it's an embarrassment for them, but it's one that I don't think they don't deserve. I think they absolutely deserve, on some level, especially how they treated the Eichel situation with his surgery and the whole trade thing. For all those guys to win Stanley Cups, to me, all it is just you treat it as evidence that those guys weren't the problem. Not to say they're perfect, but they were not the problem why this team couldn't make it.
And I'll end with a compliment and a thank you from all Leaf fans. Thank you for giving up on Jake McCabe. He's been A wonderful addition
having a good
to
year.
the Maple Leafs family. Dude, Jake McCabe's a rock star. Absolute rock star. People love him here in Toronto. It's not that he's putting up like numbers by any means,
Right,
but like that guy's not afraid to play with jam and get into it and put himself in front of shots and in harm's way to make the that play to try and win that game. Jake McCabe's been an absolute stud, and a lot of people forget started his career in Buffalo.
He
Now
played
he's
8
up to
years.
QEW.
8 years here. I mean, he was a part of a lot of that. I did not realize he's playing a career high in minutes, over 21 minutes this year. Dude, so, I mean, I knew he was doing well. I just didn't know he was playing that much. So
we've made the argument here in Toronto that he is the Maple Leafs' most important defenseman, like over Morgan Riley. Most important defenseman.
Morgan Riley?
I'm not kidding you, Joe.
The way the defense just drops off with McCabe not there. He twice we've been without him this year, and it was a struggle.
I'll tell you what, Morgan Riley's starting to get a little Erik Karlsson in him, where it's like, all offense, no defense type of thing. The numbers aren't pretty. He's like a -18 on the Maple Leafs. I think like the next worst defenseman is like a -6, and that's his partner Phil Myers. Like McCabe and Tanev, they get the number 1 shutdown minutes, and somehow they're like +12, +8. It's like, how's Morgan Riley? It's been a struggle. So Jake McCabe, he's blossoming into quite the elite top 4 shutdown defenseman in Toronto.
We'll wrap with this because I didn't realize this was really happening. I love my advanced stats and some of those sites. Evolving Hockey, those charts they have with like goals above replacement, like what percentile you're in for your position. Last 3 seasons, Morgan Riley's in the 89th percentile offensively and the 13th percentile defensively.
There you go.
Didn't realize that.
I'm telling you, trust me, a lot of Leaf fans have realized that. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. All right. Well, USA and Canada, we can't wait. I'll talk in some trash if we finally get one over on the Canadians. I haven't seen it yet.
Luckily,
not in my lifetime.
Not in net for you guys, so you might have a shot.
Okay. At least we can't watch the highlights because nobody has the rights to it. So you got to watch it on like an illegal stream. Watch that goal back. Appreciate you guys joining me and having this crossover edition. A lot of fun as always. And Dave, Mike, we'll chat soon.
Absolutely, buddy.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of a crossover edition of the Locked On Sabres and the Locked On Leafs podcast. If you want to check out any of our sister shows, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Steal and Flip got you covered. If you want to give our guy Joe Marino a shout on Locked On Bills, it's a good listen right now in the offseason as well. We will talk to you next time here in the Locked On Sabres, Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.